and welcome back to another video. As you can tell from the title, I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in November. In total, I read 11 books this month. The first book that I read in November was The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore. This is a nonfiction book in the history section of Goodreads. I believe it's under like history and biography. This book is the true story of the women who worked in radium dial factories in particularly the 1920s, but all throughout the 1900s. Basically, radium was discovered and the side effects were unknown. The industry boomed, and so these women started working at these factories using radium paint to paint clocks and watches, and they would use their mouths to like point their brush and dip the paint and paint. And these were coveted jobs, and hundreds of women, young women particularly, worked in these factories. All of a sudden, after several years of working there, these gruesome side effects start manifesting in these women's bodies, particularly with jaw pain, joint pain. Their teeth would start rotting and falling out, and then their just whole jaw would start falling out, and their just bones and body was completely deteriorating. No one would listen. Doctors had no idea what was going on. Women kept dying and nothing kept changing, and the factories would keep denying that there's any poisoning and that there's anything wrong with the paint and the conditions that these women are working in. But then several women get the courage, they get the right people on their side, and they decide to fight the system and go against these big corporations. These women paved the way for the discovery of radium poisoning and the effects of radium on one's body. I don't know anything about this story. I found it absolutely fascinating and absolutely tragic that this happened. The whole time I was reading, I kept thinking, how is this allowed to happen? How did no one do anything about this? But yeah, and I thought that this would be a really interesting documentary. And maybe one exists, so maybe there'll be one on Netflix in a few years. But I gave this book 3 stars because I really did like it. I learned a lot from it. I would recommend it. I just realized I haven't read too many history, biography type of books. I was a little bit bored at times. Overall, it was told in a really good way, but prepare your mind for a history book, not a fiction book. And I was reading a lot of fiction, so. Next, I listened to The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, The Japanese Art of Decluttering and Organizing by Marie Kondo. I'm familiar with the concept of sparking joy and holding on to only things that spark joy and getting rid of the ones that don't. I've done that before with my closet, so I'm familiar with the concept, and I'm a bit in a organizing and decluttering and just getting rid of unnecessary things in our home kind of mood. So I was listening to this book. I gave it 3 stars because I did enjoy it and I did like it, and it followed what I already knew from watching the show and just knowing about the concept. So I gave it 3 stars because I didn't necessarily get anything new from it, and it was a little bit more theory based than actual tips and tricks. But if you're looking for like very practical tips of organization, I probably wouldn't pick this one up first. There's dogs barking outside, but I'm just gonna power through. The next book that I read in November, I borrowed from the library, and it is Illuminae by Amy Kaufman. This is a young adult science fiction dystopian kind of book. I saw it highly recommended all over BookTube. I really enjoyed the side series, and I talked about that in my last wrap up, so I thought I'd pick this one up as well. This is a thick book, but it's mixed media. It's written in a way as if you're reading a case file of what happened. So there's email and chats and pictures and mostly digital communication. This follows 2 teens who broke up the day before their worlds kind of fell apart because they're on this planet and the planet gets invaded and they have to go on spaceships for safety, and they're separated, and then they start communicating digitally over, the network, and then they realize that they are absolutely in love and need to be together, but now they can't because their world's falling apart and they're all about to die. This was just not my cup of tea. I gave this book 2 stars. I really didn't like it because it drove me insane. There was no depth of character development for me, and the dialogue between the characters and different characters was all the same. They were all trying to be witty. There was this crude sexual innuendo teenage humor, even from people who were like captains and adults, not the teenagers in the story. I really didn't like this book. Not for me. Next, I read Out of the Easy by Ruta Sepetys. Now, if you've watched my previous videos, you know that I'm a big Ruta Sepetys fan. After reading this book, I have read all of her books. So I'm going to be probably doing a video where I rank all of her books. But spoiler, I really love them all. This is a young adult historical fiction following a girl in New Orleans in the 1950s. Her mother is a prostitute and she has a very strange relationship with her mother. She's very academic, she's smart and wants to go to college, but she thinks that she can't. She works in a bookshop, and then there's a love triangle with certain characters. I overall really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. It's not my favorite out of all of Ruta Sepetys' book, and it's not my favorite historical fiction that I've read, but I did really like it, so. Next, I read No Exit by Taylor Adams. This is a very intense thriller and suspense novel. This was incredibly fast-paced, incredibly scary, but not like in a horror way, just in like a, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? This girl in college is driving home to see her mother who's dying, and she has to drive through the mountain pass, and there's this epic snowstorm. She has to pull over at this sketchy abandoned rest area. There's no cell service. She walks in and there's 4 random strangers, and they're all just kind of sitting there in this rest area waiting out the storm. She decides to go outside to look for cell service, didn't find any. On her way back, she sees that in one of the vehicles already in the parking lot, there's a van, and she sees that there is a child in a cage inside of this van. So now she's freaking out because she's in this rest area, and one of these people is a kidnapper. Which one is it? What's gonna happen? Oh my gosh, it got so intense. The twists in this book were crazy. If you at all like thrillers, highly recommend. I gave this 4 stars, but this is on the very high end of 4 stars. Potentially a 5-star thriller, because this was one of the best thrillers I've ever read. I realized that I really liked fast-paced, short timeline thrillers. The whole book happens in 8 hours, so it's extremely action-packed, and it was very intense, but in the best way. It's so good. The story was so good. And this girl is just really fighting for her life and trying to survive and trying to save this child and fighting off a psychopath, and highly recommend. Up next, I read Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wein. So sorry if that's annoying. I'm annoyed. I wish it wasn't happening. But I want to make this video, so I'm going to power through. This book is a young adult World War II historical fiction. Follows 2 girls who are best friends. One's a pilot, one's a spy, and they're dropped into Nazi-occupied France. One is captured, one is held in like a safe house. And the woman who's captured is basically interrogated and said, if you don't give up your story and who you are and what happened, your confession basically, we're gonna kill you. So she intricately writes these basically diary entries of how she met her best friend, how she got to be a spy in England, and how she got sent into France, and then her friend's story of how she became a pilot. I gave it 4 stars because I really enjoyed this story. I didn't love it because part of the times I was confused, and there's a lot of technical language about planes and pilots and military stuff that was a little bit over my head, and I thought it was a great, solid story, and I liked the character development. I was rooting for them, I cared about them, and there's a bit of a twist in the end that I didn't see coming, so I really like that as well. I would recommend if you like World War II historical fiction, particularly around pilots and planes and spies. Next, I listened to Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood by Trevor Noah. I didn't know anything about Trevor Noah except that he's a comedian and the host of The Daily Show. I think it's The Daily Show. What a fascinating life, what a fascinating upbringing. He narrates his story in such an incredible way, in a funny way, in a captivating way, and I will admit that I have absolutely no knowledge about apartheid and South Africa's history and what happened, and he tells a story and a glimpse of his perspective of that, and it was absolutely fascinating, and I want to learn more about this topic and have a better understanding of it. The big theme of the book is just his place in the world. He never felt like he fit in because he just constantly either wasn't black enough or wasn't white enough. And all of these different circumstances happened in his life that led him to where he is today. But he tells absolutely incredible stories, and I would highly recommend this book. Up next, I read The Things We Cannot Say by Kelly Rimmer. This is also a World War II historical fiction. Gosh, do I have a favorite genre or what? This book I buddy read with my friend Lily. We were both listening to it on Libby. It follows 2 perspectives a woman telling her story from her life in Nazi-occupied Poland, and then it follows her granddaughter's present-day life and marriage and her having an autistic child, and then her grandma, who's the other story, falls ill and sends her granddaughter to Poland to rediscover her past and what actually happened there. I gave this book 3 stars. I liked it. It wasn't a favorite because I kind of didn't fully care about the characters all the way. I thought it was a great World War II story, and there was sort of like a twist. Overall, a good historical fiction book. Next, I listened to The Bungalow Mystery by Caroline Keene. This is the 3rd book in the Nancy Drew mystery stories. I skipped the 2nd one because it has a super long hold on Libby, so I just jumped from 1 to 3. But I plan on continuing to listen to them because they are pretty fun. They're super short. They're like a 3-hour audiobook listen. I like Nancy Drew. It's very nostalgic for me because I read these books when I was a kid, so I'm re-listening to some of them. They're super short. They're not very deep or complex, but they're still, you know, fun stuff that happens, and she goes on all these crazy adventures. So from there, I read The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This was a recommendation from multiple people on BookTube, and I think it's also a really popular, like, winter, Christmassy atmospheric read during this time of year. That's why I picked it up. I also was intrigued because of the Russian folklore aspect of the book, and I am Russian, so I'm constantly drawn to any books that have cultural ties like that to it. The setting is this Russian cold wintry wilderness and this family that lives there, and the mother dies giving birth to a girl who has magical powers, and this is her coming of age story and how she really comes into her magic and her place in the world. The Russian culture is really tied to religion, Orthodox Christianity, as well as this folklore beliefs, and this book ties those 2 worlds together in medieval Russia. It was lovely. I gave this book a 3-star because I did enjoy it, and there were parts of it that were absolutely wonderful and drew me in and were really fun to read, and the author's descriptions of certain elements were really wonderful and atmospheric and cozy. I don't read a lot of fantasy or folklore or magicalness. This was a little bit out of my element, and there were certain things that I thought maybe took it a little over the edge and a little too weird and ambiguous for me in terms of magic and folklore, but overall I really enjoyed this story. And last but not least, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, book number 7 in the Harry Potter series. I was listening to this whole series with my husband on audio because he's never read or listened to them, and we just finished, and it was so good, and I cried, and I learned some things that I didn't catch the first few times reading the story, and it was amazing. I mean, I don't really have to say much about Harry Potter. I'm actually like kind of sad that it's over, and I don't know what we're gonna listen to now because we spent so much time listening to it. Maybe we'll start over, or maybe we'll listen to something else. Let me know if there's any series that we need to listen to. But yeah, Harry Potter is a 5-star all the way. And if you haven't, I highly recommend listening to the audiobooks narrated by Jim Dale. So good. So good. That wraps up what I read in November. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in another video. Bye!